So on the last John's Briefs, Mark and I were talking about, we're not even talking about jury selection. It just kind of blew over in paneling a jury, but I want to talk about that. So we've brought Mark Victor back from Attorneys for Freedom. And on today's John's Briefs, let's talk about jury empanelment. Today's video is brought to us by the generosity of Firearms Legal Protection. Firearms Legal Protection is a legal defense program for lawful gun owners. You win the fight, and they will help you win the fight after the fight for the rest of your life. There's a link in the description for a coupon code for a discount for all active self-protection watchers. Empanelment, that's a big word. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Hey, look at that, I used the right word.
Got to empanel a jury. It's probably my least favorite thing to do at a trial. It's dry, it's boring, it's tedious. I'm not interested in all these little details of these people.
Well, so I've been called for jury duty one time here in Phoenix. I live in the city of Phoenix, and I didn't get chosen for a jury, but it was close. I actually got called for a jury selection. And the funny part was that in my case, it was a DUI, and I've been rear-ended by a drunk, and I was like, yeah, there's no way they're going to sit me on this jury. It's not going to happen. And in our case, they started asking a couple questions. They excused the jury for a few minutes, like 10 minutes. They brought us back in and went, yep, he pled guilty as soon as he saw your guys' faces. We don't need you guys, but you're an important part of the system, and we sure appreciate you. Have a nice day. So that was pretty quick.
And as much as I dislike it, it's a really important part of the trial. And you have to be good at it, and you have to spend some time on it, and it's just tedious and boring. And we want to, we're lawyers, we're warriors. We like to get in there and get the battle going. But if having the right people in the box can make all the difference.
Sure.
And so these are very loose rules because judges have a lot of discretion. So you have to think of it like this. The people who show up are just randomly chosen from the community. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can get into arguments about what's the community, right? Sometimes you may have a county-wide, or you may have a smaller than county, or you could have a statewide pool, or there could be different districts, and whether or not people will be pulled from the greater districts, that in itself is a big question, right? Because as you've pointed out, people who live in different areas sometimes, and again, this is the ultimate in overgeneralizing, right? That's what I don't like about it. But people who live in different areas have different attitudes about things.
Sure.
Generally speaking, right? Just because somebody lives there, they could have a radically different area. So
everyone's an individual.
Right. So we get people who come in. Then we get all these basic questions. If it's a big case, sometimes we'll do a jury questionnaire. We'll spend a long time laying out lots of different questions. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? Have you ever been this? Have you ever been that? And they fill out all these questionnaires, and then we get them. And then in theory, we can take them and say, all right, Judge, this guy, we don't even have to call him in. He's bad. Let's get rid of him. So there are two different kinds of strikes, right? There are strikes for cause, which means there's something about this person as compared to the facts of this case that make us feel that this person can't be fair and unbiased. Lots of times it's what they say, right? Some people might say, I always believed the cops. We don't just accept that, right? Now, I would love for them to just accept that kind of a statement, but normally that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. The judge will work on them a little bit. Now, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, I recognize you said that, but you're upset because of this earlier circumstance in your life. Do you recognize this is a different circumstance? Do you think you could put that aside and be fair for purposes of this case? Yes or no? They might say, well, we're looking at how they say it, right, how they're thinking about it. And they may say, yeah, I guess I could be fair. So an example of this type of situation, I might later on stand up and say, Judge, I want to move to strike this person for cause. The reason I want to strike for cause is because the other variety I get are called peremptory challenges. These are freebies. I don't need any reason at all, as long as I don't strike them for a prohibited reason called a Batson challenge, which we'll get back to in a second. I get a very limited number of these. Now, this will depend on the numbers, which jurisdiction you're in and how many people on the jury, but usually you're looking somewhere between 6 and 10 or 12 of the peremptory strikes, okay? So first you work through all the causes, right? If there's a jury questionnaire, we try to skim all those out. The judge rules on them. The judge will say, okay, this person we're going to strike for cause, this person we're going to talk to a little bit more and see. And so then we bring them in. There are many different ways to do this, and judges get to decide. I've been through trials where there's been such publicity and high profile nature of it where we may call them in one at a time.
Wow.
Because somebody might say something that, yes, I saw on the news where he did this or that. And, then now everybody's heard it. We got to start from scratch with a whole new panel.
Oh, boy.
You move to strike the panel if that happens. We defense attorneys love stuff like that. So, but sometimes they're called in groups of 2 or 3. I've seen that as well. And sometimes we ask them questions in front of the entire panel, as long as they're carefully crafted. Some judges give a very, very short leash on these. Some judges give a long leash. So what I like to do, if they give us a long leash, is we take it. We come in with voir dire questions. We ask them questions. How do you feel about this? You can ask weird questions. Do you raise your hand if you have refrigerator magnets? What do they say? If you have bumper stickers on your car, what do they say? What groups are you a member of? We're trying to get to what type of a person is this. But, you have to be very careful because the better I get at bringing out information, I'm not the only one hearing the information.
Right.
I may get something that makes me feel this guy's probably a pro-gun guy. And since this is a gun case and my defense is self-defense, I probably want this guy. But if I ask him, what groups are you in, and he says I'm a life member of the NRA, the prosecutor's going to get rid of him. Maybe not for cause, but for one of his peremptories.
Right, he gets peremptories too.
He gets peremptories too. So
Or she.
He or she. So the way it works is we clear out, and this usually will spend, depending on how many we're going to call, could be a full day or 2 days or even longer, just getting rid of the for cause strikes.
Wow.
Then we have this sort of somewhat formal, the judge will say, do you pass the panel for cause? In other words, have you objected to everyone and we've hashed out and rule, or do you still have more people you want to object to for cause? I may have objected, hey judge, we should move so-and-so for cause. Judge may have agreed or disagreed, whatever. Once that's all sorted out, okay, we pass the panel for cause. Now that's the end of the cause discussion. So then what happens is you have your peremptory strikes. Normally what will happen is one side will just cross off a name, hand it to the other.
It's like a draft.
The other side will cross off a name.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll take the ones that I definitely want to get rid of and I put them last. The reason I do that is because, well, maybe the prosecutor will get rid of one of mine.
Yeah.
Which happens a lot, by the way. So they cross one, I cross one, they cross one, I cross one. We go all the way till we get the number we wanted, which is normally the number of people on a jury plus an alternate or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how long the trial is going to be. And they don't get told that they're alternates. So everybody sits. So if it's a 12-person jury, you may have 14 people sitting there. And then at the end, normally it will be a lottery process.
Oh, okay.
Just before and you want to see disappointment on somebody's face.
So it's like, I sat through this whole
I've been
thing and then my
sitting there
vote
for
doesn't
2 months
count.
listening to this first-degree murder trial, and now the alternates are going to be number 8. And you'll be like, number 8's is... So number 8's got to sit outside the judge's office and read a book or something. And only if there's a problem, they get to go in and deliberate. So imagine that process.
They don't even get to listen to the deliberations so that they were a part of it?
Nope.
Wow.
They're outside the whole thing. They come in fresh. So if somebody calls and says, hey, I had a death in the family, I can't be in. Okay, they're out, new alternate in, and that's that. So it's kind of a big process. I hate doing it because it's an overgeneralized thing. I think that we just don't know that much about humans at the moment. Like your example. I got hit in the back by a drunk driver. Is your attitude about that every drunk driver's a bad guy? Or this guy maybe had a sad lot in life, or then maybe this other guy, I don't know, you might react differently to that. You might feel like, I don't want them thinking that I'm so shallow that just because some guy hit me, I'm going to automatically go that route. So we get people, for example, who have been on previous juries, they came back with a guilty. What does that tell me? Does that tell me they have no capacity to do a not guilty?
No, you don't.
Does it tell me that maybe they're ripe for a not guilty? Maybe they came out with a not guilty last time. Does that mean they're more likely to do it? See, we don't really know. So sometimes on bigger cases, we will use people who are experts in jury selection, usually a psychologist or somebody like that, and they'll come and sit down and they'll help us draft our questions for the voir dire. They'll look at the people, and of course we're frantically writing notes. I never do this by myself. I'll have the client and another lawyer sitting there, and they'll make notes of everything everybody says. And then when we decide to get to our peremptory strikes, well, this guy's an engineer, he might think this way or that way, let's get rid of him. Now, the one restriction that we have on getting rid of these freebies, this peremptory, is called a Batson challenge. And this is really an effort to keep lawyers from striking people based on their ethnic background.
Right.
Which, if you think about it, doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if we can make generalizations about people who live in Chandler, maybe there are generalizations we can make about certain ethnic groups. There are differences between ethnic groups, and to pretend on one hand that there are no differences really overthrows the entire thing we're trying to do in jury selection. But if you have a protected group, say African Americans, and the prosecutor strikes one, strikes two, and we say, I think the prosecutor's striking him because they're of African descent, then I can come up and file a motion and say, Judge, I'm going to challenge his strikes on a Batson challenge. So now what will happen is the judge will turn to the prosecutor, and he'll have to give some kind, any kind, of a race-neutral explanation. So, yes, I didn't like the way he was looking at me. I didn't like the shirt he had on today.
Right.
Something about his answer, that's a race neutral, so the judge will say it's fine. That's generally how it goes. And we could try to rebut that with something, but in essence, the way the system is structured, the defense attorney has to call the prosecutor a liar to bring a Batson challenge.
And that seems problematic maybe at times. Be very difficult.
It is very difficult. It's not a great system, right? Because on one hand, we want to say, look, this voir dire process is important, right? We're making overgeneralizations about people, and you should have a right to do that when you're picking a jury. On the other hand, we're saying, don't pretend like there are certain ethnic differences between groups or whatever. I mean, just because of we'll stick with African American just for the sake of discussion. I think, and I've got several friends who are part of the black community, and they will say being raised black in America is a different experience.
Oh, there's no question there.
Well, if they're right about that, well, then that different experience has consequences.
Right.
And I'll say this as a general matter. If you want people who are generally anti-police, I can tell you the black community is probably a community you want on your jury.
Yeah,
You're looking for people. It doesn't mean all of them.
And at the same time, if I'm looking at a jury and I go, okay, so I have, a white male who kills a black person, and then I go, okay, so now as the prosecuting attorney, I start using peremptory strikes on black jurors because they are more likely, or as the defense attorney, I start doing that because they're more likely to convict. Well, wait a minute. We want to avoid that, right? We want to have a cross representation of the community, and
see
so
why it's difficult.
It's difficult, man.
There are problems here.
Yeah, but sometimes they're the best problems you could get, and so we couldn't solve the problems without creating bigger ones.
Let me tell you my solution to this.
All right.
Since you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you.
Well, but I mean, this is what we're doing, right?
Right. But I don't know why the government gets peremptory challenges. This is not supposed to be an even-handed thing.
No,
it's supposed to be slanted in favor of not guilty. If they've passed the panel for cause, that's the end. They should take whoever's in because they represent the community. They should take whoever's in the community. We should strip the prosecutor of peremptory strikes. Let them get strikes for cause if they absolutely can't be fair. But once you're past that, everybody now has been cleared and they can be fair. And I would give that only to the defendant. And I would let the defendant strike whoever they wanted for any reason without any qualification whatsoever.
Defense attorney, so maybe slanted in that direction a little bit, but that's due process, right?
Let me say I'm not shy about agreeing to that. It's supposed to be slanted in that direction.
Right, that's what the system's designed for.
It's the reason why the prosecutor has the burden of proof. It's the reason why the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the reason why the defendant doesn't have to testify. There are many reasons, and the reason for that, if you want to get underneath that, is because we as a society believe that it's worse for an innocent person to get convicted than it is for 10 guilty people to go free. So if you understand there can be errors on both sides, and if it's truly worse for an innocent person to be convicted, we should slant it a little bit. So innocent people don't get convicted, but more likely guilty people go free. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's the way the system should run, because we are petrified. Because since I feel like I'm always going to be an innocent guy, and you always feel like you're going to be an innocent guy, don't we feel safer in a system that really only truly guilty people get convicted, but innocent people never get convicted? I like that a lot better.
I think you should run for office and make that a legislative priority, Mark.
It should be, among many other things.
All right. Well, you said this was going to be a real short discussion. I think it turned into about 15 minutes. It's really good, man.
That's the theme of all our videos, isn't it?
Right? It's like, we don't really have much to talk about here. 20 minutes later. Mark, man, I really appreciate your knowledge, man. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having me, brother.